Hello, Chrissy. I like how you mentioned in your discussion that you want to experiment a little bit with the golden hour of light. That's definitely, some of the best times to take pictures is sunrises and sunset, and it's neat to see how quickly the light changes and watch the color change to get that nice warm glow. um, you know, I just want to go over a couple things with these. One thing about you're noticing your limitations about what your camera can capture, especially, I'm looking at JPEG, but if you have your RAW file, you can go back in there and you can expand that dynamic range quite a bit, and you can bring out some more details in part of your picture if it's either the dark side of the picture or the brightest part of the picture. So I thought this stuff is definitely kind of hard to meter, and you have to pick and choose. Just like in the previous assignment where you were metering the lightest and darkest part of the scene, you have to pick which one you think is most important with the picture, and then you can go in and expand at it, by using some of these adjustment brush tools, or you can use a gradient tool, which I'll show you that in a minute. But these images, like you mentioned, are very contrasty, especially when you're photographing, into the light source. You can get some very contrasty lighting. And, it's up to you, though, if you want to try to bring out some little bit more details in some of these pictures. It might give them a little bit different look. So that's something I want you to think about. So looking at this first one, it's really neat how you photograph. Looks like you shot through the grass, up into the sun. That's really a neat perspective. And I encourage you to try that more often. Try to shoot from up in a tree or up high or down low. Don't photograph everything just from your normal height. That's where everything's kind of boring. But when you get something really low or high, it changes the perspective and it makes the picture a lot more interesting looking. So let's kind of go through these. I'm going to show you a couple of changes. If you wanted to make, you could. Okay, and it's like we have some shoes here, kind of a low perspective again. We got our light source right here. Now, it looks like if you look at your histogram, most of your details in this part, this is probably what you metered, but you could bring out more detail in this if you wanted to. And that's something I want you to think about. This is a little bit distracting where I just see little fragments of grass or something in the background. If you brought in a little bit more detail in here, it might make it just a little bit more interesting looking. Okay, let's go through here. Again with this one, you can make this a little bit brighter if you wanted to, and you could make this a little darker if you wanted to. But this is beautiful lighting. The way it's wrapped around this. This is a good example of backlighting. I love seeing these little details of this of this coming out around this plant here. A little bit different angle of that, and it's good. Play around where this light source is at. If you block it, you'll get a little bit different look behind it. Another good example, I like seeing that little bit of fuzz back there. Looking at your exposures, they look pretty good in here. This is a neat picture too, and definitely an example of a silhouette. And here's another one. So some of the things I want you to think about, just to kind of experiment with, you got this beautiful sky, but it would be nice to see just a little bit more detail, in the foreground here. Well, not the foreground, the bottom of the picture. It's really, so you could bring out a little bit more detail here. So what I'm going to do is just click on the gradient tool, and what I can create is a gradient area. So I'm going to pick this little area right here, and then I'm going to adjust the exposure on this. So I'm going to move it up a little bit, and I can move it up a lot. You can see what it would look like, and I can take this and move it if I wanted to. But I would maybe bring this down some and bring this back over here a little bit, and just bring out just a little bit of detail in these trees. Now let's kind of look at the difference between the two. I'm going to just click on the Y button, and you can see a difference. So this one's still pretty dark down here, but I can see a little bit of detail in the trees. I can go back and adjust that again. So if I click back on my gradient tool, I can click on it, And I could drag this up a little bit if I wanted to. Right in there might be pretty good. That's what's the great thing about Lightroom, is I can go back and make these changes. They're not permanent. Look at before and after. And to me, this makes it stand out a little bit more. I like seeing, just like we had with the plant, I can get a little bit of light coming off these trees. Makes it a little bit more interesting looking. This one's, you look at our histogram, got some blacks, which is our feet here, and then we have our background lighting, which looks okay. I can always hover over these clipping areas, or I can hold down the option key, so this isn't going to matter quite so much that there's no detail in this. This is a silhouette. But if I adjust the exposure just to see, we do have some feet in there. If I wanted to bring those back, I could. I don't think it's really necessary though for this. Okay, and this one, so if you wanted to come in here, I would maybe bump up the exposure just a little bit, and then I would try to create that gradient, but this time I would go this way with it. And I'm going to move the exposure this way. Now, since I don't have the raw file, it's not going to capture any detail in the overexposed areas, but in that raw file, there's actually some detail in there. So I can go back in here and adjust this a little bit. If you have your raw file, I'd encourage you to do so. So I'm going to click on Y. It's going to show before and after. Just making a picture, jump out a little bit more. I still think it needs a little bit more detail in the midtones. I'm going to adjust the exposure just a little bit more. Be right in there. The same with this one. It's just you can tell it's definitely contrasty. There's no midtones, but maybe if we can just adjust the exposure just a little bit, move everything over just a little, and then I would go in with that gradient tool and try to experiment with that and move your exposure back a little bit in that area. You kind of see a difference in there. Kind of the same thing with this one, maybe adjust exposure just a little bit, gradient tool, move the exposure a little bit this way. Okay. Looks like you got your white balance looks like it's set okay. I don't see any problems with that. And this is another good example. You're going to have much better results than I'm going to have if you had the raw file again. But I would go in and try to just bring in some of that sky a little bit on this one. And you could even clone out these areas if I wanted to. I can go in here with my adjustment, with my with my spot removal tool. Click over that, pick a neutral area. And not have to worry about it at all. Kind of see the before and after with that one. And then with this one, you're going to definitely see a lot of contrast, not a lot of mid-tone, but if we bumped our exposure up just a little bit here, and then maybe went back with the gradient tool again, and I'm just following, our picture, most of the time our horizon's in the middle, so I'm making this kind of match the horizon. Kind of bringing that down a little bit more. This is just some stuff to kind of experiment with. Let's see how that looks. So kind of before and after with that one. Now, this is where the gradient tool is getting a little bit of trouble. You'll notice here, since we have this one area that goes through the whole picture here, it's not going to be consistent from top to bottom. So this is a chance where I would not use it. So I'm going to click delete, And I might just go in with my brush here, my adjustment brush, and go in and paint some of this. This is where it's not going to always work. And just go in and make this little area a little bit darker. Alright, so that's what I wanted to show you. Thanks.